Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor and Council members for the City of Grand Prairie. Thank you for allowing our delegation the opportunity to present today. We, as environmentally conscious, life sustainably focused, and affordability-minded residents of Grand Prairie, respectfully ask that you follow the leadership shown by Wheatland County and Stettler County number 6 and formally withdraw the City of Grand Prairie from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, the FCM, particularly given its current structure. To quote the County of Stettler, we believe the FCM is increasingly moved away from adequately representing the unique challenges and priorities of rural municipalities. And from Wheatland County, our decision stems from a growing concern about how well the FCM's focus aligns with the unique needs and challenges of rural communities like ours. We believe the current structure and priorities of the FCM do not provide sufficient opportunity to represent distinct needs of rural communities. So our concern is this. In 1990, the International Council on Local Environmental Initiatives, ICLEI, was founded with the support of the United Nations to bring global sustainable development policies directly to the municipal levels. After the 1992 Earth Summit introduced Agenda 21, ICLEI began working with national and local government associations, including the FCM, to advance these policies across Canada. Since the mid-1990s, the FCM has partnered with ICLEI to promote international frameworks like Agenda 21 within Canadian municipalities, particularly through initiatives such as the Partners for Climate Protection. This partnership marked a shift. What was once a bottoms-up advocacy organization giving municipalities a voice to the federal government, especially during disasters and times of unfair treatment, the FCM has transformed into a top-down deliverer of international policy mandates to the local levels. Today, in unison with the federal government's mission of Canada being a post-national state, the FCM increasingly promotes flawed net zero and climate change mandates alongside models promoting open borders, high-density living, often without full democratic consent from local communities. By offering grants that only partially cover projected costs, municipalities have sometimes been enticed into programs that carry long-term obligations and financial impacts without full provincial oversight or consultation. This creates a real risk for local autonomy and sustainable fiscal planning. So now let's take a moment and look at a few important factors about climate change and net zero. Carbon dioxide, CO2, the supposed driver of climate change, makes up only about 0.04% of the Earth's atmosphere. Human activity is responsible for approximately 4% of that 0.4%. Alberta, often pointed to as Canada's highest emitter, per capita emitter, emits about 338 million metric tons of CO2 annually when both industrial and personal emissions are combined. However, Alberta's natural environment already offsets far more CO2 than it emits. Forests absorb approximately 380 million tons of CO2 each year. Wetlands absorb approximately 25.8 million tons annually. Agricultural lands absorb about 300 million tons per year. This gives Alberta a net carbon deficit of approximately 367 million tons, confirming Alberta sequesters more CO2 than it produces. This calculation does not even include the enormous carbon storage and capacity of Alberta's 5.6 million hectares of peatland. So in short, if Alberta were sealed off under a dome, plant life and therefore human life would not survive because of an insufficient amount of atmospheric CO2. As biologists will tell you, plants require at least 150 parts per million of CO2 to sustain life. So in conclusion, seeing only the likelihood of long-term tax increases, greater regulatory burdens, and lasting harms to our natural environment and way of life, we respectfully ask the City of Grand Prairie to reconsider its participation in the FCM, particularly in its current framework. We further encourage the city or councillors to consider these questions. What tangible benefits does the city of Grand Prairie receive from the FCM's membership in its current form? What are some measurable advantages of being in the FCM for the taxpayers of Grand Prairie? What is the annual membership fee currently being paid to the FCM? And what are the total operational and compliance costs associated with fulfilling FCM program requirements? Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for your presentation today. I will open it up to council for questions of the delegation. And as mentioned earlier, we deal with delegation business at the end of this, towards the end of the agenda, rather. Some of these questions I think will probably be good questions for council to ask administration. But for now, if there's any questions of the delegation. I did have a question, actually, in regards to the third question. The second question, the measurable advantages of being in the FCM for the taxpayers of Grand Prairie. When we get to the opportunity to ask administration, we can talk about grants that have been received. I know in particular there was a grant received for a significant amount of trees this year that will be planted in the city, and that grant was funneled through, from the federal government, funneled through FCM. But the measurable advantages personally that I think are, that are sometimes hard to quantify are the conversations that we have with other mid-sized cities. The two municipalities that you reference actually aren't urban municipalities. They're not members of our Alberta urban municipalities. They are rural focused, and I would say that many of the conversations at FCM tend to be larger city focused, and at times, having attended this conference, I know that some of the conversations may not be applicable, but some of the greatest benefits that I've seen from this conference are the conversations that we have with comparable municipalities across the country. I think back in 2019 when the then chair of Alberta Municipalities put together a group of Alberta municipalities to really promote Canada's energy. And the initiative of that was to municipal politicians. I think Councillor Bressie donated some time to be in that booth, and that booth there was there to educate Ontario and Quebec in particular about the importance of Canada's energy being shared coast to coast. People had similar T-shirts on, so people that weren't familiar that you were from Alberta and how important the energy sector was to our province learned a lot about what was going on in not only our province, but how Canada could be a stronger country by sharing its resources coast to coast. And that isn't something that you would see as part of the regular curriculum or the agenda of an SCM conference. Those are the things that happen in between the conferences because we are having conversations with other municipalities from across the country. So personally, for me, I would agree with some of the comments in your in the earlier part of your statement of how the organization has seemed to pivot away from an advocacy group that supported municipalities and more to be a service that works to distribute grants on behalf of the federal government. They have grown in size by staff over the years. They've never really, to my knowledge, served our municipality in a way of advocating any of our federal priorities, but there have been many other benefits, such as the grants that we've received most recently. And I think that FCM, you're right, does align with some initiatives that may not be in our best interests, in particularly in our region. But I think that some of my colleagues may have some other comments in regards to what they see of the value of FCM. And then the questions about the cost and what specifically we've got back from this program, I think we'll leave to when we have opportunity to ask administration. But for now, I'll recognize Councillor Bressie.
Great, thank you. Well, thanks for coming in. I really do appreciate when people are coming in and respectfully sharing their concerns and thoughts, and always appreciate when residents do that. So thank you for being here. I am curious to talk about in terms of the new framework for FCM, and you talk about changes that's made. What's your understanding of recent changes that have been made at FCM? Like, what are you saying when you say the new framework there?
Well, because it was originally created back in the early 1900s, yeah. And then since 1992, it's slowly been progressed to a more of a top-down organization rather than a bottoms-up organization.
What do you mean by top down? How do you see it as a top down organization?
Well, because they, like I said here, they entice municipalities and cities and stuff to follow the UN agenda, the Agenda 21.
The federal grants there that you guys receive from the federal government is pushing driving forces for this UN agenda.
Right. Yeah. So when we get a grant for planting trees, do you see that as something we shouldn't plant those trees, or?
No, I mean, you should be planting trees anyways. Yeah, no, nobody's disagreeing with that. It's just the other stuff, right? Like, how much does this cost the city taxpayer? You know, when I bought a house, I didn't sign up to solve the world's UN problems, right? Like,
right. Yeah, and I guess I just don't really see that when I talk to FCM, although I do definitely see that there's been I don't think the West has always been heard by FCM the way it should be. And I definitely do hear from some of my rural colleagues about the concerns about rural representation there. And I know for me, it's still an elected organization where you have a board that's elected by councillors. They're not appointed by the federal government. They're not appointed by anybody else. And for me, I think what the value is getting to advocate for Alberta needs. FCM does have ears in Ottawa, and they do advocacy, and they do talk to the federal government. And when they do, I want Alberta's voice to be at that table. So Mayor Clayton shared a great example of a few years ago when the last time we had a big pipeline debate in this country. Personally, I think municipalities should stay out of that debate because it's not really our jurisdiction. Unfortunately, we did see a lot of municipalities, especially west of us, taking a very strong stance and being effective in their opposition to those pipelines. And I think when I saw those other municipal leaders taking a stand and being effective in shutting down pipelines, I thought it was a responsibility of Alberta municipal leaders to stand up and tell Alberta's story about how we do have sustainably, responsibly produced energy that this province relies on, not just to eat at its home, but also drive its economy. And for me, I think if we withdraw, I think there's some fair conversations to be had about cost benefit. But for me, when there's this large table going on across the country, I think it would be a real shame for Alberta not to be there telling its story and being there pushing back when untruths about our industry and untruths about our communities are being told. And I think for me, that's the biggest benefit to participation, is getting to push back on the narratives when they need to get pushed back on.
Okay. Are there any, if you were to leave the FCM, is there any avenues where you would, is that avenue gone then?
Well, and if we left FCM, one of the most direct ways is FCM is member controlled. So it's run by a board of directors that are all municipal councillors that are elected by municipal councillors from across the country. And that board of directors, they take their direction through a resolution process. So what it is when municipalities across the country want them to advocate for somebody, they bring to a convention a resolution forward saying, for all these reasons, we want you to advocate for this action. And then members get to vote on whether or not they're going to advocate on that topic or not. And if you're not a member, then you don't get a vote. So you get no say in who's on the board of directors, and you get no say in what advocacy positions the organization takes. So that's the biggest thing you lose if you're a municipality that says we're not going to be a membership. Then it is a democratic organization, and you only get to vote if you show up to vote.
Okay. Well, yeah, it sounds like a federal government issue, right? So, you bring that to the city and you get a voice, but, does the citizens of Grand Prairie get a voice?
Yeah.
Do we get to come talk to you and tell you we don't want to be a part of this?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think that's our role, is to listen to you, not just here at these meetings, but also I think all of us are probably happy to get a coffee with residents too and have those conversations here. What are your priorities? And of course, there's 75,000 of you that we need to balance and hear from all 75,000 of you and figure out how do we get the best thread that serves the most people possible, just like they have to do when they hear from their thousands of members. But absolutely, I think it's important for us to have these conversations with folks.
Do you have a number on how much this costs the city every year?
Yeah, and I think, yeah.
So Off the top of my head, it's $16,000, but when we have an opportunity to ask administration, we'll get some more information for some of your questions, specific details. I just wanted to, before I go to Councillor Thiessen, who's next in the queue, following up on some of Councillor Bressy's comments, another initiative that is quite valuable at FCM is when we have an opportunity to bring forward resolutions. It was probably about 4 years ago now when we were seeing a real disparity in rail service. And so, especially in Northern Alberta, we were hearing from industry that rail was really being not well executed in Northern Alberta. We were speaking to organizations such as International Paper and forestry partners from across Northern Alberta who were facing challenges such as the auctioning of rail cars, who were facing the piece where they would order 100 rail cars and get 80 rail cars, and they weren't getting fully serviced. And with that, some of their inventory was being spoiled. So through conversations of other municipalities in Alberta, we put forward a resolution, and we actually put it as an emergent resolution for the federal for FCM, for the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, to advocate to the federal government that CN get rid of these rail disparities, get rid of rail auctioning, have better communication in their winter services, share better data. So that resolution process is something that we have an opportunity, as Councillor Bressy mentioned, to share Alberta stories that if we weren't a member, we wouldn't have that opportunity to share those issues. Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you, Mayor Clayton. Thanks for coming in and taking the time, gentlemen, today to speak to this issue. I know sometimes clarity comes a long way. My question for you is in regards to the programs that FCM offers. So in your speech and in your letter here, you talked about the Partners for Climate Protection program. Are there any other programs that you see as maybe the city might be entering into that you're aware of, or are you asking us today to detail all the FCM programs?
Yeah, I got it. Okay, so I'll just ask this then. In the last year or so, you hear a fair push towards high-density housing and stuff like that. And I know this city council here has been grasping with rezoning things and stuff like that. So is that a directive from the FCM? Is that part of the Partners in Climate Protection program and stuff?
Well, I think they definitely put out programs to help diffuse a bit of the urban sprawl that we saw through the 80s and 90s, especially with population increases through immigration and in-migration. Mid-sized cities and larger urban areas, especially mid-sized cities, because we're not used to seeing the big high-density buildings. We're feeling a bit more pressure to densify, and with that in mind, with the immigration doesn't actually come from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. Really, it's as Mayor Clayton and Councillor Bressy said, it's really a conversation that we have between other elected officials at FCM. We get ideas from them. We share ideas with them. I remember being a new councillor in 2014 and being all excited about our edible landscaping policy that I got over the finish line, and talking in our little Alberta huddles that we get. You notice you got the City of Edmonton councillors there, Calgary. You start sharing your ideas, and I've seen edible landscaping concepts go across the province of Alberta from those conversations, as well as into the province of Manitoba and even as far as Halifax, Nova Scotia. So it's not just an opportunity for us councillors to get ideas and new ways to do stuff or to obtain grants to grow our city responsibly, but it's also an opportunity for us to share our ideas and to take that local homegrown idea and put it out into the world, into the larger, vast swath of elected officials across the country, and maybe they can pick that ball up and run with it there in their community too. So I understand, I guess, some of the concerns here, and I think your questions are really, really great at the end, and I think Council would be remiss to not ask these questions of our administration, because we should have a full handle and understanding of what partnerships are in. But for me, I don't see FCM as a top-down directing municipalities to do stuff. I've read some of the ICLEI material, and I also met with Ms. Braun when she was here in Grand Prairie on tour, and I saw you gentlemen there too. And my question to her was, okay, well, besides getting out of FCM completely, is there a way you can get inside FCM and change it from the inside out so that it works for everybody, maybe not for the international people that are influencing their way across the ocean into our country, into our communities. So I understand your concern completely, but I also see many benefits to being part of the FCM membership as well.
Councillor Blackmore.
Thank you, Mayor Clayton. So, as my fellow councillors will tell you, I'm not a big supporter of FCM. I agree with you. I've seen many changes since 2001 when I was first on council over the years of how FCM has changed its focus to focus more on what the federal government wants us to do rather than on what they would like the federal government to do. I have seen that switch and I agree. However, one of the problems in Canada is we have a very large population that lives mostly in the east. And in Alberta, our population is only about 11 or so % of the entire population of Canada. And so it's very hard to have a voice when you're the small person in the room or when you're the limited population in the room. And so my question is, do you not see value in having any kind of voice at the table? Do you not see value in being at the table and having a voice rather than not being at the table? Because if we're not at the table, do we really have a voice? And that's something I've struggled with for a number of years. But in the end, my conclusion is if we're not at the table, we don't have a voice. And how do you feel about that?
So then how do you force change? How do you force change in the FCM?
Well, by attending and voting on resolutions, by electing the board members, but by participating. If we're not a member, we don't have any say on the resolutions that the board continues to carry forward when they advocate to the federal government. If we're not a member, we don't get to vote for the members that represent Alberta. In particular, Edmonton and Calgary each have a member as the largest municipalities, but then we elect an urban and a rural position on that board. If we're not there, if we're not a member, we don't get to elect those people. If we're not there, we don't get a voice in those conversations, to Councillor Blackmore's point.
Is it possible to maybe have a survey for the city and ask the residents if they'd like to be a member of this FCM?
To have a referendum on a $16,000 membership, I don't think would be a good use of council's and the city's money. Referendums are significantly expensive.
Okay. Well, just like an online survey or, email or just even Facebook. You guys have a good social media on Facebook. So, it doesn't have to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to do a vote. And some of the examples of why you guys are in the FCM, like it sounds like there needs to be an organization where, it's great to have a voice at the federal level, but as a citizen, I voted in for you guys so that you could look after Grand Prairie, and it's great to have a voice, but at the same time, are you looking after our interests or are you looking after the federal government's interests?
Well, the interests that we're looking after are representing our issues at a federal table. There are significant numbers of dollars that become available to municipalities through grants. And every single day, our organization puts together applications to get a piece of that funding. And so on a regular basis, we aren't successful in applying for grants. So when we are, in particular grants that are funneled through FCM, we see that as a win. And so I'll go to Councillor Bressy, and then maybe I know a bulk of the conversation will be with administration in regards to the time and the money that's received and specifically what the grants are. But I'll go to Councillor Bressy.
Yeah, I think that part of the conversation is there is two really distinct parts of FCM. There is an advocacy side of FCM, and then there's a grant program side of FCM. And the advocacy side of FCM is truly a bottom-up thing where I explained how it's with resolutions. It's members going to the federal government and saying these are the changes we want you to make. These are and lately what the big argument push there has really been about. In terms of advocacy, has largely been just for municipal funding, where we know that municipalities collect about 8% of tax revenues in Canada, and yet they deliver about 60% of public infrastructure and the majority of public programs that people touch. And so a lot of the advocacy has been saying, hey, there needs to be an understanding of how municipalities with 7% of the taxes are doing most of the public services. And federal government, you need to, if there are things you want to see happen in this country, then you need to fund it. Has been a big part of what's going on, saying, hey, don't make us do things. And hey, federal government, give us more right, more ability as communities to decide what we're going to do and how we're going to go forward. And a lot of that advocacy of saying, hey, this is what we want, is a bottom up. It's a democratic. It's the members saying, this is what we want from you. And then there is the top down thing, which is federal government giving grants. And if you apply for a grant, you say, hey, here are the requirements that I'm going to meet for these grants. And there's some grants that I think are great. For example, when we get money to plant trees with no strings attached other than we have to plant those trees, I think that's very awesome. When there's federal grants that say, hey, you're going to get this money, but you have to do X, Y, Z in your recreation facilities, and you have to do X, Y, Z with your zoning bylaws, I don't think those grants are great. And but I think what's important to understand is for those grant programs, you don't have to say, hey, we're going to follow everything that the federal government wants or that FCM wants to get any grants. You look at it program by program. And I think it is important when we're looking at these grants to say, hey, is this a grant that we actually want? Is this a grant that has no strings attached, like just plant trees? Or is this a grant that has a lot of strings attached, like do X, Y, Z with your transit? And for me personally, I think it's really important that we're saying yes to those grants that have no strings attached or that work for our community, because those are federal tax dollars that our residents are paying for anyways. And I want them to get their fair share of that money back to our community. I don't want those no strings attached grants to go to other communities. But I think you're absolutely right when there's grants that ask too much or are sticking federal noses into local business where those federal noses don't belong, then I don't think we should be participating in those. And so I really do think that this is something where there's programs they don't support, which is very different than saying, hey, the whole organization I think we should walk away from.
So where is the city at what stage is the city of Grand Prairie in the Partners for Climate Protection then? Like there's different levels to the whole program, and it ultimately ends up to where you section off sections of the city and you call it, and you've probably heard of the term 15-minute cities kind of thing. So where's Grand Prairie in that?
The city of Grand Prairie has no 15-minute city initiatives.
No, I know, but that's the end game. So we've
For who? Sorry.
Well, like Edmonton just did that, announced that they're doing that. So, but first of all, they started, at the level where they're collecting all the data, how much CO2 is being produced in the city and stuff like that. They collect all the data and stuff, and then they analyze it, and then they eventually move on to where they do the 15-minute cities. And I know that the city of Edmonton, it was denied for quite a few years. Now, in the last 6 months or so, they've come out and said, yeah, well, that's what we're doing.
I think that's a fair question for the city of Edmonton and their plans in regards to a 15-minute city. I don't see how that's relevant to the city of Grand Prairie's 70,000 people who has no initiatives currently on the docket for a 15-minute city.
Okay. Because I think there's like a 4-stage process that the FCM...
It's not anything my council has explored or the city of Grand Prairie has explored.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Councillor Bressie.
Yeah, thank you. That's also something I've never personally heard FCM or anybody associated with FCM say, hey, we should force people to stay close to their home, or we should force people to stay in these districts. I've heard a lot of conversation about, hey, we should give people options to stay close to the home if they want. So it's good to have things like parks close to people's homes so they don't have to drive across town to get to it. But I've also think everybody thinks you should also have the right to drive to that park across town if you want to. And so I definitely have heard conversations about how do we give people more options for things close to their home, but I've never once heard anybody associated with FCM say, hey, we should force people to only use the park close to their home, or we should force people to do anything.
So the backyard suites and the garage suites there, that was recently passed here, I think in November. So one of the things that really bothered me about that is, you look at Grand Prairie. Grand Prairie gets its name from Big Prairie, right? We have lots of land here. We don't need garage suites. We don't need backyard suites. We're not Kelowna. We're not Vancouver Island. We have lots of land. Everybody's dream in Grand Prairie is to have a house with a garage, right? We shouldn't be cramming people into garages and backyard suites. So that is part of that UN initiative that's being pushed by this FCM.
Go ahead, Councillor Bressie.
Yeah, thank you. I think if you disagree with that, fair enough. If you don't like the changes we made to the land use bylaw to allow those, fair enough. I never once have had somebody outside our community saying, hey, Grand Prairie should do that. Where that was driven from was we had local industry and local people who are investing in our community say, hey, we think that you should make these changes because right now we're not seeing homes get built in Grand Prairie. And we know that we've got low vacancy rate and we think you should make those choices. But I only ever heard local people telling me what they thought Grand Prairie should do. I've never once had somebody from outside the community tell me we should.
I think the vacancy
Residents
rates
were coming to us saying that they had affordability issues, and we're looking for ways to make owning a house more affordable. So adding a secondary suite is a way to have another revenue stream for a homeowner. Adding a carriage suite provides an opportunity maybe for your in-laws or somebody to live in close proximity to you and make it more affordable. The initiatives on that were strictly brought forward, as Councillor Bressie mentioned, by residents looking to find affordability, looking for ways to own homes, as you mentioned, not to in any other agenda for density. However, as mentioned, urban sprawl is something that is a concern for municipalities. We don't want to be spread across the entire footprint of the city. Municipalities like to be walking distance to schools. They like to be walking distance to retail and recreation and driving distance and bus distance to capture amenities. So density is something that is an efficiency. It also it helps solve some affordability issues.
Yeah, I don't think Grand Prairie is that big that I've never heard anybody say they want to walk to downtown and go shopping. That just doesn't happen as much. So I disagree.
Can I say something?
Actually, sir, you're not really part of the delegation, but
Can I say something?
sure.
Well, I live in Crystal Heights Lane. And there's driveways, everybody has their driveway. But parking, I can't even get out of my park right across the street from me.
Yeah, and I hear it all the time. People struggle with parking in the high density neighborhoods where, there's an up-down suite and then a backyard suite. And yeah, the rich people that own the rental properties don't care, but the people that actually live in those neighborhoods, we care. We don't want to see Grand Prairie turn into a rental haven. So, and
Get out of your driveway, you're
yeah, and one of the affordability issues, how to make Grand Prairie more affordable for renters, is to lower taxes.
Councillor Plott.
Sorry, Mayor Klein, I thought we were here to discuss FCM, and so I feel like we're getting way off topic on FCM. I appreciate people coming in, but I just feel like we're getting kind of sidebarred into some other stuff here as well. So.
Yeah. So thank you for coming today. As I mentioned, council will have an opportunity to ask administration some questions based on the questions that you presented with us. You're welcome to stick around, and that will be shortly on in the agenda.
All right, thank you
Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you.